to harass, since it's not anything physical in most cases, or maybe not at all. Sexual harassment has a lot to do with perception, unless somebody decides they want to make it all in terms of litigation and make it a legal act, something about an illegal act. So a lot of it really still resides in the place of perception. So I may perceive sexual harassment as well as may not perceive a particular action as such, while somebody else may not. And so one has to be very careful about that. So it always speaks to the fact that we have to be careful about how we relate with people, because while I may not see it as a big issue, someone else might. So we have to be careful of how we generalize our behaviors and those things like that. That's the only thing I would really add on to that.
And could that be the reason why we hear a lot, or we see a lot of more reports coming from women on men where it comes to sexual harassment versus the other way around? Because as you're saying, the perception and what we accept in our culture as being a deviant or an unwelcome behavior. For example, a woman might make an advance on a man, and he's going to see that as, okay, it's no big deal, it's a woman. Yeah, that's cool. Versus if a man does the same to a woman who doesn't really appreciate it, then that becomes sexual harassment. So could it be that's exactly what you're explaining?
I would say to some extent, yes. We have to recognize that a lot of it has to do with perception, and it all depends on who is receiving and who is giving that particular action or behavior that is considered to be a problem. Because there are many things. We deal with human beings, and that's something that we have to be very careful about. Human beings are not chess pieces. While we may want to and try to legislate certain things, and we try to, do certain things to make sure we protect people, rightly so. Don't get me wrong, rightly so. Human beings are not chess pieces. We have to recognize that human beings have choice. Human beings have an opinion. Human beings perceive things differently. And so while a man may see that as attention, not all men do. Some men see that as a serious thing. You may be married. Somebody may be becoming really too aggressive, and you see that as an issue. And so again, it has to do with the individual. It's perception. And so, yeah, I believe that is something that we have to pay attention to when we speak about those type of things. When it becomes something that goes into things like legal actions, where there is a law that says you should not, or this is unacceptable, then we're talking about something different. But yeah, we have to recognize that perception. Human beings are not chess pieces. You can't just, because you say, for example, you want a thing to be a particular way, means that everybody's going to see it that way. All right, that's what I was basically saying.
Right. So, Mr. Pierre, what would you say some of the criteria is or are to determine or what constitutes sexual harassment versus sexual violence? Mr. Pierre, I'm not sure if you got that. We lost you
I was off for a little while there.
Yes. So we're asking.
Yes, sorry, I was off for a little while there.
Okay, so we are speaking in terms of the criteria. What criteria does one use to determine what constitutes the sexual harassment versus the sexual violence, and whether or not it's a major problem in our region?
Well, again, right. I would say that it is a major problem, and I'll give you some stats. May not necessarily be from the Caribbean. I don't know if you hear me. Not necessarily be from the Caribbean, but I will try to talk about a little bit of statistics. As Mr. Stroud rightly put it, it's a matter of perception, right? So, for example, if I am making an advance, a sexual advance towards somebody, a female, and she does not appreciate it, does not take it kindly, is not welcomed by her, she can say that I am sexually harassing her. If I am sending her nude pictures or videos and so, that constitutes sexual harassment. Now, when we look at it is sexual assault, it is something quite different. All right. What was the contrast that you were looking at? Sexual harassment against
and sexual violence.
Right. Now, sexual violence has a lot to do with one person just basically taking advantage of the other. It may constitute something that is physical, okay? It may constitute something that is forced or coerced, and we can refer to that as sexual violence. You might be holding somebody against their will. You might be forcing them, or you're forcing yourself on them, or you're groping them, and they are basically telling you no. They are resisting. They are. It's not something that come, and there is a physical issue with it. You can constitute that as sexual violence.
Okay, and Mr. Stroud, in terms of the same question, do you see it as a big problem, say in Grenada or in the region?
I think it's an issue within the Caribbean region. That's something
Well,
that is something that we need to pay attention to. And I think, in all honesty, the issue here comes with, again, our recognizing and respecting individuals. Even if for whatever reason I may make sexual advances to someone, a male on a female, as a man, as a human being, if that person isn't pleased with it, one of the things that I am supposed to do as a person who respects another human being is back off. And the issue comes here is where we don't back off because we somehow sometimes feel, hey, want to I, want to she, all of that. And so that is where the problem comes. You human beings, you might see somebody you like and you might try something, as we might say. But when that person indicates to you, or they might act in a particular way that sends the message, hey, yo, this is unwanted from you, we have to learn as men to back off. And that is why we get
Right.
ourselves into problems because we fool ourselves into thinking, oh, wrong with she, why, that kind of thing like that. And so we have to be careful to make sure. And I think, yes, that is an issue that we have sometimes in the Caribbean among our people, our males, is that we have to understand that we respect each other, respect just the human dignity, and respect the fact that people have a right to not want a particular part or type of advancement. And if a woman says, hey, yo, this is not for me, then we have to learn to stop and to back off. And I think that's where the issue comes. And
Right.
it comes a lot, it has a lot to do maybe with our culture. I mean, let's be honest there. So much of our culture is based on sexual innuendo and those kind of things like that. Let's be
Right.
fair. It's a big issue of who we are. You see it in the calypsos or songs, whatever the case might be. It's a big part of who we are and part of our culture. And so it is not far-fetched for persons to make those type of advancements. The issue comes when you make that advancement and the person backs off, or the person detracts this, and the person is indicating this is not for me. We have to learn to say, all right, cut off. And that's where our problem comes in most cases. I don't know
Right.
what Sapir would say on that.
Right. And speaking of culture and some of the behavioral patterns and some of the encouragements that you're talking about, as we see in music and so on, what would you say are some of the most common forms of sexual harassment within our society? Mr. Pierre?
yes, yes. As Mr. So touched on music, when we listen to some of the songs that objectify women, some of the negative connotations coming from music, and it's all part of our entertainment, and we take it as part of our culture. There are persons, there are females that are offended by it. All right, and we take it and we believe that maybe I could call a woman that, or I could behave in that particular manner based on some of the things that the songs say. Again, it is something that might be unwanted. Some persons might be okay with it, right? But by and large, a number of women might just be offended by it, and that basically would create the problem.
Right. We have this thing that we usually do. Psst. Um, can
Uh,
that can that also constitute a sexual harassment?
I would say yes, okay, because there are some women that detest that.
Yeah.
Okay, there are women who would not to be sipped. If I think that's the word that we use. They figure that your persons might do that for an animal or something else, not necessarily for somebody who consider themselves a lady or a woman. All right, so that can constitute sexual harassment.
Right.
However, it is an integral part of our culture. So we have to be able to separate those issues. We have to understand, just as Mr. Stroud said earlier, that it's a situation where we have to respect individuals. All right. We seem. Let me tell you, men do a lot of things and get away with it. Eh? in the whole scheme of just trying to attract a female. We do some things, and we sometimes are not forthright and upfront and approached a woman in a way that might connote some respect, and might bring some sort of value to her. So we prefer to do the sipping and send in the kiss and all of that. And there's some persons, some females are offended by it, and we can't say that could be defined as sexual harassment.
All right. Mr. Straw, do you wanted to jump in here?
No, no, I just, yeah, one of the things that, in terms of the human dynamic, that we have to be very careful. Somehow, we, as human beings, we have a tendency, when we are not, when someone, we want to, whether we want to acclimatize ourselves to somebody, we have a tendency to somehow lower them in our eyes. And so we kind of have a sense where we have lesser respect for them in order for us to be able to approach. Now, that's something that we have to be very careful about as men, because it speaks badly to us, because it says that we do not value ourselves as men and as human beings well enough to be able to step up to a level, as opposed to you want to bring the person down to where you may consider yourself. So we have to be very careful. Be willing to be the type of person that brings value to our relationship, and not cause a situation, or lower somebody's esteem, lower somebody's way of being, in order to get your way with them. And so that's very key. You have to be very, very careful. And as human beings, we tend to be like that. You see to teach with children, you see what that does. Children on the playground, you don't like him simply because he might be doing something that you figure he's better than you are. You have to bring him down. You have to make him feel small because you don't feel as important as he does. And unfortunately, we bring that into adulthood as well, and we behave that way, unfortunately. And it's a human dilemma. It's a human dilemma.
Who does? Okay, I think Mr. Pierce, sorry, you wanted to come in here?
Yes, please, if I may.
Go ahead.
And I think that speaks of the workplace, or sexual harassment within the workplace dynamic. All right. So you have maybe a young lady who is trying to get a job. All right. Beautiful as ever, nice as ever, and everything. She comes, and the person who might be, her potential employer might be making some advances that she does not appreciate. She's here to work, and she wants a job. She has financial issues. She looking to advance herself, and too often we have persons who are in an authoritative figure, in an authoritative position, who can offer her that benefit, and is preferring to make sexual advances to her. Too often we have that sort of dynamic within the workplace, for persons to either get a job, or keep, or get some advancement where they are working, and that again is a serious cause for concern within our workplace.
All right. And and speaking of this, who would you say sexual harassment affects most, and who are the main perpetrators?
Well, let me
And in terms,
just let me
go ahead, go ahead.
I have some statistics here. I will just drop it in there, and then Mr. Strode, I guess, would would would
Yes, yes.
would talk. And this is coming from, I think it's from the United States. All right, it said 1 in 4 women experience sexual harassment within the workplace. 1 in 4 women. 1 in 3 women, ages 18 to 34, has been sexually harassed at work. Um, 81% of women experience sexual harassment in a verbal form. And when we look at men, they say 1 in 10 men experience sexual harassment. And then 25% of men are concerned about being falsely accused of sexual harassment. I just want to drop that statistics there and hand over to Mr. Stroud to make his comments.
I'm not too sure if I should say anything again, but 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 it's interesting because some of the statistics I saw, the gap was actually wide. I saw one particular stat that indicated
Yes.
it was 1 in 71 in terms of men, in terms of that.
Right.
But
Right.
again, I think it speaks to what we said earlier on. Is perception, is how people see it. Men primarily don't see that those type of sexual advances as harassment, and so you have a tendency, more than likely, women were the ones who would see it in that way, and there are reasons for that. How you're socialized, the type of mindset that we've had over the period of time. So yeah, that yes, that's accurate. That would be accurate.
All right. But how serious of a problem is sexual harassment within our societies? How does it really? What are the long-term effects? How does it really affect the individuals or the victims?
Well,
Mr.
if we
Pierre?
really talk, if we,
Okay.
oh,
Okay. Go
oh,
ahead. Go
sorry,
ahead. Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Mr. Stroud, and
No,
we're
No,
going
no,
to
go
go.
ahead, Mr. Shaw. Go ahead.
if we take the statistics to heart, and if maybe generalize it and say more than likely we may be very close, even though we're not exactly there in terms of the U.S. statistics. I'm not too sure that we're so far away from it. It means, first of all, in terms of the implications, it means that our women are in positions where they feel that they are less than human. They are being belittled, so to speak. They are not valued, so to speak. They are not seen as contributors who should be respected. So that in itself is an issue. To me, I think it's a big issue. These are our sisters, these are our mothers, these are our wives. So I mean, if you look at it in that way, you understand the implications. And of course, the implications are wide. Society has there are implications for society, because when someone, especially we talk about, let's say it advances to physical or sexual violence, then we're talking about absenteeism from work. We're talking about persons having sometimes mental breakdown because of how they were treated and the type of physical violence that was meted out to them. What about the home? What about relationships that could possibly break up? What about children who are going to be affected by the fact that their mother is in a situation where she can't function in the right way? And those kind of things. So we have to, the implications are actually very, very wide. And it's something that we need to take serious, and we not to take it in a light way, but we have to look at it in a very honest way. And okay, what do you think you want to add on anything to that?
Who is working and she's been sexually harassed by her supervisor. Sometimes she would feel, look, I'm afraid to even go to work and have to face that again and all, because it's almost a pressure. It's almost a situation where she might be forced to comply just to be able to keep her job. There was a paper written by an attorney general in St. Lucia that basically spoke about that, where um, more often than not, women, you know, seem to suffer the most simply because of the position that the perpetrator is at. He or she might be in a more authoritative position, or in a position where they could provide work and so, and it creates some serious discomfort on work. It creates problems with other workers, where discord between workers, and so workers. Our society, we like to talk and gossip, and if that boss man is holding that lady back from going home at a particular time, or giving her privileges and so forth, people begin to look.
I think we lost. I think we
Yeah.
lost Mr.
And
Pierre
if I
here.
continue with the trend that he was going, what I think he was about to say in terms of that is that if that situation, that individual is being seen to be, favored. I mean, knowing our communities and knowing how we are, that could create a lot of issues within the workplace. And so, yeah, that is one of the things that we have to be very careful about, yeah, in terms
Right.
of that. So,
Uh, and would you say our laws sufficiently targets sexual harassment or speak to sexual harassment and sexual violence?
well, in all honesty, we really don't have laws that speak to sexual harassment. In all honesty, yeah? Most of our laws, if the laws that we have when it comes to anything sexual or sexual nature, is in terms of things like assault and sexual violence. We don't really have laws per se that speaks to sexual harassment, and so that's something that we have to, from a legislative agenda perspective, that is something that we have to be very careful to maybe seriously address. I know Sir Pear is somebody who advocates a lot for some of these things, so he could maybe speak a little bit more to it. But I know for sure we don't really have laws re-sexual harassment in Grenada.
Mr. Pierre?
Right. In my research about sexual harassment and laws, only two countries within the Caribbean region have placed sexual harassment laws on their books, and that is Belize and the Bahamas.
Bahamas.
But we do have a serious issue. What is being pushed now is the creation of sexual harassment policies within workplaces. So we could see emerging from that. We should be able to begin to formulate and draft some laws to really deal with it. Now, again, sexual harassment is such a ticklish issue, that one of
Right.
persons claiming to be victim and all of that. Remember the statistics I just gave you, where men are actually very concerned about being accused of sexual harassment.
And most of these things, most of those type of concerns came as a result of legal parameters being placed. And so,
Yes.
and there are instances where men have been wrongly accused, legally, no, wrongly accused of sexual harassment. So yes, there is that as well. One of the things I think that would have to come with that is a lot of serious education programs like
Yes.
this, helping men to understand the implications of some of those laws that will eventually come.
Right.
That will eventually come. But yeah, yeah.
And
And could it be because of all these gray areas, you find that countries are a bit hesitant to implement any sort of stringent
yes,
law
yes, yes, yes.
against behavior because it
Exactly.
becomes so broad and wide that yeah, it becomes a very ticklish.
I mean, I think that's what Mr. Fair was saying is a really sensitive issue because as we started off, it's a lot of it has to do with perception. A lot of it really has to do with perception because nobody has touched anybody. When we deal with
Yes,
the
yes,
physical one, we that's clear. That's clear cut enough. Somebody could come and quote and testify. You touch me here. You touch me here. You did this. You did. That's a totally different situation. But how do you say he say that? Who heard? When? Where? Why? Where? How are you going to necessarily prove things like that?
right.
And so that is where it becomes a problem. But it does not mean that. I think a lot of the intervention that has to be made can come without laws. I think it's just a matter of having respect for each other. If
Yeah.
we, and I think it's just having respect. If someone, again, you could be interested in someone, you could make advances at someone because you have an interest in them. But when that person says no, then as men, we have to learn to just back off. And if we don't get that, we're gonna get ourselves into serious problems. Serious
Right.
problems.
So,
Yeah.
what can men do to prevent and hold their male counterparts accountable? Because if the law is not going to, for reasons that we have just explained, how can we, as citizens, as individuals ourselves, assist our brothers and from at least becoming perpetrators of that sort of behavior?
And that's a very interesting question. But let me put it against this backdrop. A gentleman was telling me, well, if you are looking at this, that, or the other as sexual harassment, it means that I would not be able to approach a woman. Okay. Um, but one of the things I think that we need to do as men is when we are looking for a partner, we need to approach that person with a great deal of respect, a great deal of honor, and we must be plain and upfront. I mean, maybe a lot are sometimes very afraid to do that, so they would choose the sipping and the making all kind of joke and derogatory remarks and so, with the hope that you get the female's attention and you have that conversation to begin the whole process. But we need to look at the at how we approach our females, and from what perspective, and it must come from a place of respect. It must come from a place of honor and high regard for the individual.
Mr. Stroud, you wanted to come in here with that?
Now, I was about to say, well said, sir.
Okay.
Yes,
So,
Jody. Yes, Jody.
what strategies can be implemented both as a preventative method and intervention on sexual harassment and violence?
I think one of the things that the Jamaicans have a saying that it takes a man to raise a man. And I think that is a legitimate and very honest reflection in terms of how we treat with situations that are male issues. If men talk to men, if men encourage men to understand the need, if we as men insist on being with our families, parenting our children, because some of these things are some of the issues, the reasons why we have some of the issues that we have. A lot of our boys have not learned from men the right way, the correct and positive way to approach a woman, and those kind of things like that, how they treat a woman with respect. We haven't seen those things demonstrated. What we've seen are some of the negative sides of it, because they've been glorified in our music and in some of our aspects of things that we call culture. I'm not too sure those things are really our culture, but there's another debate for another time. But yeah, so but yeah, I think to go with that saying for the Jamaicans, it takes a man to raise a man. It takes men to really talk to men and speak to their issues and speak to each other. We need to speak to each other and encourage each other to seek for positive interactions with the opposite sex, and making sure that we make sure that we treat human beings. And a lot of it has almost nothing to do with male female, and a lot to do with just simply having respect for humanity. I mean, if we
Right.
really have
I
that simple
also
base, yeah, we good. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
I also want to add that our women must accept our men when they are making the effort to show respect.
Mm,
We have a
good
situation
point.
now where women sometimes, when a man trying to do what is right and what is good, we sometimes soft or we play, or, things of that nature. I don't know if you hear me.
We
Things of
hear
that
you.
nature. So it takes almost a paradigm shift. It takes a change in the way that we view each other, and a change in the way that we do things in regard to each other. Okay. Some women like to be approached in this kind of derogatory or harsh manner. All right. And if you don't do it, they figure, well, you're soft, or things of that nature. I have seen so many different shades of the issues of sexual relationships that, it makes one wonder. And again, a lot of times it comes out from what we see, what we experience within videos and music videos and music and all of that.
And we
So
can
we have to both male and female have a responsibility, as it relates to how we regard each other and how we approach each other.
and also how we help guide each other, as Mr. Stroud was saying. It
That's
takes
correct. That's
men,
correct.
because I see it sometimes, and I'm tempted to say, boss, how do you think she would feel when you approach her that way, versus trying another way? Sometimes I wonder, guys, do you really think that that's going to work? So probably for people who know better, they can pull him aside and say, boss, that's not how it should be done. So each
Right.
one help one, and probably we will help to better the way we approach women. Hey, girl, whoa, you're looking fatty in the bottom there, boy. I mean, is that how you want to meet your potential wife? Is that how you want her to remember your first words to her? So you got to be smarter in the way you approach women. Gentlemen, I would like us to continue the conversation. We have run out of time for today, but of course we can always be back to speak more about that. I know it was just maybe a week and some ago, we were talking about a similar topic. And of course, we are continuing to discuss these, of course, and Grand Chap has a big part to play in these conversations. So I would like to say thank you to them as well for putting all of that together. Yeah, they're doing a really good job, and probably one day we will get to speak to one of the administrators in terms of what they're involved in. You'll be surprised to know how many of these conversations they are driving out there. All right, so as to eliminate those unwanted behaviors within our society, and when it comes to gender. Mr. Stroud, I'll give you the opportunity to, if there's anything else that you thought that we should have discussed and we didn't, at least you can take the opportunity to do so before we wrap up today's program.
I think we did a good job in trying to cover a lot of the the nuances in some in that particular situation. The only thing I would really add is that I think I would speak to what we spoke about last, men speaking to men in terms of. So I think as men, what I would say to us as males, as men, let's make sure that even though our generation may have issues, let's try and see what we could do to make sure the next generation of men are in a better place in terms of making sure that they understand, respect for humanity. Let's make sure, because I know the reality is that we come from different places. So while you and I may have come from a home, and the point that you made a while ago, that's what hit me, because the reality is that you see potential in a female as wife. Not everybody sees it that way. And that's where the issue comes, because of where you come from. Because where you come from, that ain't wife. That's just a moment for some people. And so it's easy for them to say, why'd I get over there and the rest of it? So it's, because it's just a moment. But for you looking at potential wife, and that speaks to where you come from, with you, how you were socialized, how you were brought up. And so I believe it has a lot to do with us making sure that we help our young men, the ones who are coming up. It's got a tough job because they're kind of being fed on a lot of negative stuff already. But we have to try and see how we can help them to be in a better place than we were. That's all I already say.
Well said, and identifying, the differences there. Mr. Pear?
Well, I want to echo those very said sentiments. Now, I have children. I have two boys and two girls, and the job of really modeling the behavior of respect, not only for females, but respect for self and respect for others, is critically important. If we want to have a society where we show respect and gain respect, we must begin to cultivate respect within the persons and that we have responsibility for. And if every household could do that, trust me, we would have a society that would connote respect, would give respect, and a society that, by and large, would be peaceful. Right? Would be peaceful. Well, one of the things I also want to add: sexual harassment, according to the UN, is can be considered a crime, and it's something against human rights. All right, it's an act against human rights. Now, Grenchap is one of the organizations that would stand up for the rights of human beings of all size, figure, shape, and form. And I'm proud to be one of the persons that they sometimes call upon to advocate for some of the things like sexual harassment and so. So kudos to Grenchap. But we have to understand that we can't be treating our fellow men and women in ways that are derogatory and demeaning. I think that our world needs a better approach when we are looking to have relationships with other people.
All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much again for the time spent on the program today, and we're looking forward to having many more of these discussions. All right.
Thank you, Mikey.
All right, no
Do-
problem. No problem, folks. So there we have it. And we were speaking to Mr. Arthur Pear, who's a male advocate, and he's with Grenchap as well, and Mr. Pearson Stroud, who is a counselor. And of course, we will keep the conversations going. We thank you for your time at this time of the day, and we wish you all the best. And don't forget to join us later on for our Mikey Live program. Do have a good one. Take care.